James, thank you very much for sharing the story of your children and the challenges they face in the educational system and your recommendations for making education more inclusive. Our next speaker is Dr. Sally Lindsay. Sally is a health sociologist by training with an MA and PhD graduate degree in sociology from the University of Western Ontario. During her fellowship, Sally examined the social barriers and inequalities facing chronically ill and marginalized populations. Sally was also awarded the CIHR Strategic Training Postdoctoral Fellowship, a interdisciplinary primary healthcare research through the Center for Studies in Family Medicine at the University of Western Ontario. Prior to this, Sally completed a postdoctoral fellowship in England, where she gained experience in the United Kingdom's expert patient model and was awarded the Economic and Social Research Council funding to explore the social cultural mechanisms of engaging patients in self-care. So, Dr. Lindsay, welcome to our conference.
Thanks everyone, and I'm so excited to be here today, especially with the other presenters who have a very similar theme. I'm a scientist at Holland Bloorview Children's Hospital, where we focus on children with disabilities. And my job is to help find better ways to include children with disabilities into society. And for the past couple of years, my work has focused on including them in school and also in work. So today I'm just telling you about one of the projects that I'm working on. This is just a very brief and basic overview of what autism spectrum disorder is. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, and I'm happy to go into further detail if you want later. It is one of the most common childhood neurological disorders. I think the current rate is about a diagnosis of about 1 in 150 children are diagnosed with autism. And we have seen an increase in this rate of diagnosis of over 600% in the last 10 years. So it's becoming quite an issue, especially for teachers and how they're handling this in the classroom. Some of the common symptoms associated with autism spectrum is a lot of it is to do with sensory issues, so like coping with noisy environments, which, as you can imagine, is very difficult in a school setting. Also touch and sound, like fire drills, maintaining eye contact, and reading verbal cues, and also difficulties with social communication. And I just wanted to emphasize that this particular project, we're focusing on children with higher functioning autism. You realize that it is quite a broad spectrum, and we're also focusing on kids in mainstream classrooms. So what is the relevance of autism spectrum for inclusion in school? We know, I've done quite a bit of work over the past few years as well with a wide variety of children with disabilities, and we know that children with disabilities are much higher risk of being bullied and excluded, and this is particularly so for children with autism. And some of the latest figures have shown that they're about 20 times more likely to be bullied than their typically developing peers. In school boards, another important reason why we should be focusing on including children with autism is because school boards across Canada are reporting a tremendous increase in children being diagnosed with autism, up to about 60% increase just in the last 2 years alone. And a lot of teachers are reporting that as more students are being with autism spectrum disorder are being placed within mainstream classrooms, they're being left with the task of how to include them effectively, often without clear guidelines or training. I don't think I need to convince anyone here of why inclusion is important, especially at school, but I want to be clear about what our definition is, because sometimes in other places they assume that inclusion means that simply placing a child with a disability in a mainstream class that they will be included, and that's not always the case. Here we're referring to inclusion as being an equally valued member of the class, involving presence, participation, acceptance, and achievement. And also, our work is strongly rooted in the UN Convention on Rights of the Child, which stipulates that all children should enjoy a full and decent life in conditions ensuring dignity, promoting self-reliance, and active participation. So our research, we're focusing on, I'll just get right to our research questions for the sake of time. We asked teachers what their experiences were, so their challenges and their successes of including children with high-functioning autism in mainstream classrooms. And we also asked them what advice do they have for best practices for creating and maintaining an inclusive classroom. And we did this through a qualitative study, so it was interviewing. We ended up having 13 teachers. We interviewed them in Toronto and in Peterborough public district school boards. We had 10 female teachers and 3 male teachers, all elementary school, with quite a wide range of teaching experience, so from 2 years to 22 years. And they all had at least 2 years of teaching experience. They all were currently teaching in a mainstream classroom, and they all had at least some experience of working with a child with autism spectrum. And the teachers reported 3 main challenges in teaching and including children with ASD in their class. And I'll go into some more details of each of these in a moment. So the first was in understanding and managing behavior. And the second was in barriers, so around school policies, training, and resources. And the third, similar to the previous presentation we just heard, was around creating an inclusive environment with their peers. So looking at the first one in a little bit greater detail, the teachers were saying that they had challenges around understanding and managing the behavior. One of the most common themes that teachers kept telling us was that they didn't have enough training, particularly in how to work with the child. They said that a lot of their training was around in how to help them academically, but not always socially, and helping to include them with their peers. A second key challenge was around unstructured times, like fire drills, recess time, field trips, anything that was a little bit different in their normal daily routine. Third key challenge was explaining to the other kids in the class why they might need to take a bit of extra time with that child, because they couldn't, for ethics and confidentiality reasons, they can't always just say, oh, I'm spending more time with this child because they have autism. They're not always allowed to tell them what their diagnosis is. And finally, they found engaging the students in the class to be sometimes difficult, especially when they shut down, as this quote is saying. So this one teacher said, "I think the biggest challenge is when they shut down and you don't know how to get through to them. Like in the primary grade when they're underneath the table and they won't talk to you and refuse to come out and they don't know and they refuse to do what you want." So the teachers were saying that they just don't have, they were not given the training on what to do when this happens. And how do you leave a class of 20, 35 students to deal with one student? They found it a bit challenging. The second main challenge was around like political barriers to do with resources. And again, the training opportunities. A lot of them were saying the training was either not available, and when it was very expensive. Like in this one example here, there is very little support for teachers in doing the planning for kids with ASD. Unless you have special education qualifications, there really isn't the time or attention given to working with those practices on planning for inclusivity. So again, they're just looking at the very basics of like the academics portion and not in how the child can be included with the other kids in the class. Another barrier was that teachers lacked often, as in the previous presentation, they were mentioning access to resources and equipment like assistive devices, which could help to improve their quality of life and quality of education. Several teachers also talked about, I don't know if it's different in this province, but they were talking about the pressure to meet test scores as well. And there's the example of that there. The third key challenge that teachers faced was also in working with parents. And some of them, they found that some parents were in denial about the condition, and they had this dilemma of the teachers recognized some of the characteristics and thought that they should get it diagnosed, but then the problem is that if you don't have the official diagnosis, you don't have access to those extra supports. Another, along the same lines, was a lack of understanding of the condition amongst other teachers in the school, staff, parents, and students. And I'll give the example of one teacher. And they said, "Help other parents understand that this child is not bad, but is just as important as your child, but has other needs." But they felt in this dilemma again of they're not able to break the privacy law and say, well, he's got autism, so give him a break. And again, going back, another challenge again and again that I see in my research is peer acceptance and understanding. And I'll give you one teacher's example. Another huge challenge is getting people to understand that the behavior of a person with ASD is communication. When they are behaving poorly, they are trying to tell us something. It's hard to get people to understand they're not acting out to be a pain. They're acting out because they don't have a way of telling you what's bugging them. And that's exactly what this other teacher was saying in the example below. In an integrated class, they often get anxious and they don't always function well in an integrated class, and that could cause maladaptive social behaviors, and then that creates challenges for them making friends in the class. So we asked teachers, well, those are all of the challenges that you're facing, but what can we do? What's working for you in helping these kids to have a better time in their class and in helping them to feel included in their classroom? So, and I'll just highlight them all quickly and then go into each of them in a little bit more detail. So the first is advocating for resources and essential training. And second is tailored teaching methods. And then teamwork within the school. Building a rapport with parents and students. And then finally, building a climate of acceptance within the class. a lot of the teachers that we interviewed were really strong advocates and had really gone above and beyond their job to get access to resources for the students in their class. And they said that's the only way that you can help these children is to really be a strong advocate. And also there needs to be more training and resources, both formal and informal. So like workshops, and a lot of them also said informally, just by chatting best practices with other teachers. The second key strategy that they said was around having a structured routine. They said a lot of the children like to have either on their own desk or like placed on the wall, like an outline of the routine for the day, and also to give them like an advance notice of if there was going to be something different in the day, if the order would be switched, or if there was going to be like a field trip or a fire drill. And also most of the teachers had mentioned it's very important to build on the students' interests. A lot of times, one of the characteristics of people with autism spectrum is that they have a very focused interest, and it's important to relate the material to that specific interest. And also goal setting and rewards. And this one teacher in this example here was, I'll share that example. This past year I had a child with Asperger's. We came up with a system for him. We had this little grid on his desk for the days of the week and the time periods of the day. And we set a timer, and if he made it through that time period without an outburst, he'd get a sticker on the grid. So when he had tallied up enough stickers in the day, he would get a certain privilege. And just a few more examples about tailored teaching methods that some of the teachers were describing to us. Two more of the, well, one more example of preventing behavioral outbursts. And this is one example that the teacher said that they use quite often in their class. If they're distracted because of their focus is everywhere, and to help them, you can help them to have some kind of a manipulative to play with. So like a squeezy ball, remember those stress balls we used to have, or like an elastic band. You don't want to single them out too much. But I have some students who felt that by putting their feet on an elastic, like behind the chair, it helped to release some of their tension. So just giving them like a fidget toy, something to focus on, but something that isn't really going to point them out as being different from the other kids. And a few teachers also use this 5-point system where you tell the kids that you get them to recognize what the different symptoms of anger are, or when they're starting to feel a little bit upset. And this one teacher describes, with the help of special education teacher, we built a 5-point system. First, the child is getting kind of edgy. Second, you're starting to get a little bit more agitated. Third, you're getting kind of angry. Fourth, you're mad. Fifth, you're just irate. And then you give your ticket to the teacher and you go and find a safe spot. And all the teachers were notified about it. And quite a few of the teachers felt that this system had worked, and it helped the children to recognize when they were getting angry to avoid getting to the fifth level. And the third strategy that the teachers used was teamwork within the school. As this one teacher had said in the quote here, in all my career, there's been no other disability required as much of a village to raise a kid. I've just never seen a disability where you need everyone's input. And I think that's so important, that you draw on other people's experiences, the occupational therapists, use the resource teachers, get them to help you. And a fourth strategy that the teachers told us about was building a rapport and a relationship with the parents and with the student. And a lot of them said that they would ask the parents, what works for your child at home and try to transfer some of those strategies into the classroom. And one teacher was giving their example here. You have to meet with the parents. I always did home visits because I wanted to see the kid in their own environment. You can learn a lot by how parents interact with them and how many things they do at home that will help or hinder. And I also asked the parents to come up with a list of their interest inventories, again, getting back to their special interests. And also, it was important to create a comfortable and safe environment for the child. A lot of the teachers talked about how they would create like a safe spot where the child could go if they wanted to have a little bit of time by themselves. And the fifth strategy, it relates back to the earlier presentation which we just heard, and that was around building a climate of acceptance with their peers in the classroom. And teachers had advocated for providing more information about ASD and emphasizing accepting differences among students and minimizing exclusion. A lot of them, they would tell the kids in their class at the beginning of the year, we're all different and that's okay. And they tried to highlight that we should value diversity. And a couple of teachers are giving their examples here. One teacher did give an example of an older grade, I think it was grade 4 or 5, and the child was happy to self-disclose to the class. He said, here I am, I have ASD, and he told the kids about it, and he said, sometimes I may act in this or that way, and this is why, and the teachers found that when you're kind of more upfront about things and give the other students the information, and then it's a little less daunting for everyone. And that's what the last example is getting at there. And just to sum up, although children with ASD are increasingly being placed in mainstream classrooms, it doesn't guarantee that they're going to be socially included and accepted by their peers, and we have to work really hard to make sure that they feel included and that they are accepted in their classrooms. And we realize that teachers are still facing many challenges and there's still a lot more work to be done. And thanks. That's all I have to say.